Welcome back to part 3 of my search for which horror franchise gets the worst the fastest. Sorry in advance for how long this video is, hope you enjoy. Number 3. Halloween. There are currently 13 Halloween movies, with one coming out this year. The original Halloween is the horror movie that got me into horror movies. Now you'll have to excuse me because Halloween is the only franchise on this list that I haven't seen all the films for. That's because I'm watching one Halloween movie every Halloween. I'm currently up to Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers, but for the rest of the films, I'll just watch reviews for them. But they will probably be briefer. Halloween gives us another super iconic killer, Michael Myers. I think he is an amazing killer. He's just the husk of a man. His mask shows no emotion. In fact, it shows the shell of a person. It's a face with no features. I love in the original, you can't even see his eyes, they're just voids. Michael barely even shows emotion or pain. He never runs, he just stalks and follows, never uttering a word. He creates an intense atmosphere. It feels inevitable that he'll catch you. He just walks because he knows he'll always get you. One of his best qualities is his lack of motivation. In the first film, his motivations are very unclear. He's just evil, pure evil, as put by Dr. Loomis.
I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
A fun fact that nearly every Halloween fan knows is Michael Myers' mask is actually a William Shatner mask, or a Captain Kirk mask from Star Trek. The mask was then modified, having the eye holes cut bigger and the sideburns shaved back, and of course the skin was painted white. The first Halloween had an extremely low budget, that's why the mask was made in such a cheap way. But limitations force us to be more creative, and that's definitely the case for Halloween. Even though it's simple, it's effective, and of course, how could we talk about Halloween without mentioning its iconic soundtrack? Even if you haven't seen any of the Halloween movies, there's a decent chance you would have heard its theme. It's integral to the atmosphere of these films. The plot for the original Halloween is nice and simple. Our opener gives us a first-person shot of young Michael Myers killing his sister. This results in him ending up in a sanitarium. 15 years later, we see Michael Myers escape. Michael returns to his hometown where he starts stalking and killing teens. And that's mostly the plot. We also have Dr. Loomis looking for Michael and Laurie and her friends going about their night until Michael Myers attacks them. The build-up is great. So many good shots from Michael's perspective. And just in general good shots. This really hits home the stalking aspect of the film. Our characters are constantly being watched. My favourite character by far is Dr. Loomis. He just comes up with the best lines. His overdramatic acting and side antics are just hilarious. I love this random scene where Loomis is scaring kids.
Go ahead, Lonnie. Go in.
Hey. Hey, Lonnie, get your ass away from there.
He also gives us some really weird info about Michael Myers. They find a dead dog and Loomis says,
He got hungry.
"What?
He got hungry.
Michael ate a dog? That's a thing? He does that?" But as much as I would love to sit here praising the movie all day, there are some critiques. Like some characters' lines not having the best dialogue. This character says totally so many times.
Totally never show.
Totally charted.
Totally.
Totally.
Just watch the movie and count how many times she says it. Once you hear it, you can never unhear it. And some of the acting isn't amazing. Just look at her dead acting. Zoom in on that goofy face. But this movie is full of great moments, like where Michael pins this guy on a wall. Even Michael looks impressed that the knife went through him and into the wall. And of course we have our iconic final girl chase scene. It's so funny that Laurie takes out Michael twice and then drops her weapon right next to him. I suppose these horror movie tropes had to come from somewhere. And finally we have Loomis finishing Michael by shooting him 6 times. Michael falls out of a window, but when Loomis looks down, he's gone. The movie ends with shots of all of our locations, in the dark, with Michael's breathing getting louder, implying he could be anywhere. A great way to end a great film. Now Halloween isn't the first slasher, but it's one of the movies that helped kick off the genre. Halloween sparked the slasher phase, so it's technically Halloween's fault that we got all those Friday the 13th movies, for better or worse. This leads us to the sequel, Halloween 2, which kicks off exactly where we left off. Like, exactly, we start with Michael falling out of the window and immediately have Loomis cement himself as my favourite character when he yells at this guy and runs off.
Tell the sheriff I shot him.
Who?
Tell him he's still on the loose.
Is this some kind of joke? I've been trick-or-treated to death tonight.
You don't know what death is.
He then goes up to the sheriff and just loses it.
I shot him 6 times. What? I shot him 6 times. I shot him in the heart.
Can't have gotten very far. Come on.
I shot him 6 times.
Yeah.
This guy, this man, he's not human.
Man, Loomis is just the best. After the original movie did so well, this one of course got a bigger budget. And that means more gore and action. Like this scene of the innocent trick-or-treater being hit by a police car. Laurie is sent to the hospital and Michael follows. This movie reveals that Laurie is actually Michael's sister, so Michael is here to finish the job. While I don't actually mind this reveal too much, I do think this takes away from the mystery and fear behind Michael's motives. I think it's far more scary that he's going around killing without any reason. He's just evil. And this plot of Laurie being his sister would become really weird later on in the franchise. Most of this movie is spent in this seemingly empty hospital. Like seriously, there's like 5 people running it. On a holiday you'd think it'd be more busy. But whatever, I guess Haddonfield is just a mostly safe place, you know, other than Michael. Once Loomis finds out who Laurie is, he ramps up the craziness by holding this guy at gunpoint and shooting at the window as a warning shot.
What does you fellas usually do? Fire a warning shot, right?
Sorry I keep bringing up Loomis, but he's such a mad lad. After Michael gets some cool kills in the hospital, Loomis once again arrives to save Laurie. And the end fight is so cool. I love how Michael gets shot in the head twice, causing blood tears. In a final sacrifice, Loomis blows himself and Michael up, and this would result in both Loomis and Michael's deaths, or at least it was supposed to be that way, but that would get retconned later. This was an amazing sequel. It does a great job at capturing the filming style of the original film, and feels like it wraps up the story nicely. Even though Michael is wearing the original mask in this film, it does look different. That's because it was kept in poor conditions, and the new actor for Michael was wider, so it stretches the mask a bit. This results in Michael's eyes being able to be seen. While this is definitely a downgrade from the original, it's still nowhere near as bad as the masks would get. Halloween 2 was a big success, so you think they would bring Michael back again, right? Wrong! Halloween 3 Season of the Witch has nothing to do with Michael at all. Halloween 3 is a frickin' roller coaster. It's just so bizarre. So the original Halloween was going to be an anthology series of movies, having every movie follow a different Halloween related story. Halloween 3 is the first and only attempt at this. So I'll try to explain the plot as best I can, but it's actually just so freaking weird. So this crazy sounding man holding a Halloween mask is sent to a hospital, uttering lots of warnings, saying they're all going to die, and stuff like that. Once he falls asleep, a mysterious man in a suit walks into the hospital and kills the crazy dude with his bare hands. He then proceeds to walk outside, sits in his car, pours gasoline on himself, and lights himself on fire. What the hell? What a way to start a film. It's actually pretty intriguing. This sparks the doctor and the crazy guy's daughter to investigate the mask factory. As the movie progresses, we discover that something strange is being done to the masks in the secret final process of their development. This is reinforced when a lady finds one of the tags from a mask. It seems to have some computer chip in it. As she messes with the tag, a laser shoots out and fucks up her face. After she dies, a bug crawls out of her face, foreshadowing what's to come. As our main character starts investigating the factory more, agent-like men attack him. After our main character kills one of the agents, he starts spewing out what looks like egg yolk. It's revealed that all the agents and workers at the factory are robots. That's why they spew egg yolk, I guess. But even after he kills one android, more eventually come and overpower him. Then the main villain reveals that they have had androids since 1785. Don't know why that matters, but we have that info, so do with that as you please. Now, at the beginning of the film, there was a news report saying that a part of Stonehenge was stolen, and that pays off here, I guess. Apparently the mask company stole a piece of Stonehenge. The main villain makes a point of how difficult it was to steal and move to the facility, but he never actually tells us how, so what's the point in highlighting it like that? Oh yeah, and apparently Stonehenge is magic or something. Look man, don't shoot the messenger, I'm just telling you what's happening in the film. But it gets even weirder. They are putting tiny bits of Stonehenge in all the masks. The villain gives us a demonstration of what the masks do. Now, something I haven't mentioned yet is this extremely annoying ad for the masks that plays constantly throughout the film.
Happy, happy Halloween, 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 happy, happy Halloween.
We have to hear it so many times. It's so annoying, but it does serve a purpose. When someone is wearing a mask and sees the ad, it kills them. But that's not it. It also turns their heads into bugs and snakes. So the bad guy's plan is to kill all the kids by turning their heads into snakes and bugs. That's actually the plan. Stonehenge is going to turn these kids' heads into snakes and bugs. I just can't get across to you how freaking weird this is. It's insane. Like, what do you actually say to that? That's the movie so far. And apparently their motivation for doing this is because people don't respect Halloween anymore or something. I don't know. I really don't know. I don't get it. After this, our hero escapes and messes with some of the tags from the masks, causing them to explode and kill a lot of androids. After this, the main villain slowly claps and then gets zapped by Stonehenge, and this happens. I have no idea what's happening here. Is he dying? Is he being teleported? Is he even human? I have zero clue, and we will never know, so I guess you'll just have to live with that. But even after this, it's too late to stop their plan, because the movie ends with the ad playing and implying that all the kids in the country die. What the heck? Like, seriously, this has got to be the most bizarre movie so far. I swear, the plot makes zero sense. Like, why is any of this even happening? But yeah, this movie's not great. That annoying ad plays way too many times. Oh yeah, and there's this side plot that's really gross. It's a love story with the Doctor. It's gross because the Doctor is twice the age of the love interest. Our main character is so sleazy as well, but at least our main villain is cool. He's so into the role, I just love it. Honestly, this movie is so weird that I kinda recommend it, to be honest. It just needs to be seen to be believed. Now, people obviously didn't like Halloween 3. Everyone was mad that Michael Myers wasn't in it. So, the next movie, Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, obviously brings him back. But it's not just Michael who's back, but our favourite loony doctor, Loomis. Apparently Michael and Loomis survived this. Loomis escapes with minor burns, but other than that he's fine, and Michael survives with serious burns, and is in a coma. Apparently being in a coma allows you to survive being shot a whole lot, and also being cooked alive. But someone didn't survive our time jump of 10 years, and that's Laurie. Laurie was killed in a car crash between movies, so Michael's new target for this film is Jamie, Laurie's daughter. I'm personally not a big fan of Michael's new mask in this new film. It just doesn't have the same depth as the original mask, but it's not too bad, especially when compared to later masks. Now, to be honest, this movie isn't too special. It kinda just does what you would expect, Michael hunting Jamie. And most of the kills are pretty boring, except this one. I love this kill. It's so stupid. Michael stabs this girl with a shotgun. It's so funny that he doesn't use it like a real gun, and would prefer to pin someone to a wall with it. We also get this funny side plot, where Loomis is ranting, gets a mob started. They go around hunting Michael, but accidentally kill some innocent people.
Earl. It's Ted Hollister.
You dumb son of a bitch.
Rip, I guess. Anyway, the movie ends with these cops completely gunning down Michael, who then falls into a mine shaft where he would stay till the next film. But the movie's not over yet. Halloween goes and pulls a Friday the 13th by having Jamie become a killer tease. Jamie copies Michael's first kill from when he was a child. Loomis sees her holding scissors with blood on them, and his immediate reaction is to try and shoot her. He's stopped but has a complete mental breakdown. Would Jamie become the next Michael Myers? No, of course not. Just like in Friday the 13th, this plot point was changed. The next movie, Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers, is a huge step down in quality. While Part 4 had some lazy moments like this clip where Michael is wearing a pink mask, with white hair instead of his normal mask, this movie would take the cake for laziness. For one, the Myers house looks nothing like the Myers house in the original. Please don't try to tell me these are the same. The sound design and editing are extremely lazy. There's these two cops, and every time they show up, these weird sound effects play. Listen.
All clear.
Nothing above, nothing below.
Like, seriously, I didn't even edit that sound in. I know it sounded like I could have, but I swear I didn't. This is all the movie, for real. I can't believe how stupid this is. Are you actually serious? Those sounds in a horror movie? Whatever, we have more to cover in this garbage movie. This movie begins exactly where we left Michael in the last film. The cops shoot Michael, he then falls into the mine. This time we get to see the cops throw dynamite down in the mine just to make sure he's dead, which I respect, you gotta double tap. But of course Michael escapes. He climbs out through a small cave, landing in a river, where one of the dumbest and funniest scenes plays. He has this scene where Michael is just floating down a river with the Halloween theme playing. It just looks so dumb. Michael looks so freaking goofy. He looks kind of fat in the scene as well because he's wearing safety gear under the outfit. This gets even dumber when Michael washes up in some weird hobo shack. Michael goes to kill the guy living in here, but passes out. For some unknown insanely dumb reason, this guy takes care of Michael. We then get some text letting us know it's been a full year since the last film. Michael wakes up in the same place. That's right, this hobo guy looked after Michael for an entire year. He's been there an entire year! How the hell does this make any sense? Another thing that doesn't make sense is the explanation to why Jamie tried to kill at the end of the last film. Apparently she has a psychic link with Michael, and I guess Michael tried to make her kill, but she didn't actually kill anyone apparently, and she can't talk now, she's a mute. This results in some really painful scenes, like this part, where Jamie and a stuttering kid try to tell Loomis something.
What did it sell?
Big woman.
A big woman? A big woman who works in the store. What? Jamie, Cookie woman.
Speaking of Loomis, he's completely off his rocker in this film. He was always pretty over the top and probably mad in the other films. But in this movie, he's just completely crazy and dangerous. At one point he uses Jamie as bait for Michael, and look what he does.
You want her? Here she is. No, little girl. Go and get your little girl. Let's play a game. Catch the little girl.
Bro, that's not okay. Loomis loses it. In this scene while trapping Michael, he gets so worked up that he has a heart attack. This was yet again supposed to be Loomis's actual death, but that wouldn't last. Now for the big guy himself, Michael. His mask looks absolutely garbage. Just look at it. When he turns his head, it's not threatening at all. In fact, Michael isn't really threatening in this film, and he does things that feel out of character. Like when he spends a good amount of time trying to run people over. Overall, this movie is just not well planned. Its story is all over the place, and it would start to introduce an extremely stupid plot. Throughout the film, we see this mysterious shadowy man. He would later break Michael out of prison. Yes, Michael went to prison in the end of the film, and yes, it looks stupid. But the shadowy man, combined with Michael's new tattoo, would lead the Halloween franchise in a questionable direction. Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers, is an extremely strange film. Now, before I get into this, I must say I haven't seen any of the Halloween movies past Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, so I'll be watching reviews to make my points here, but I'll probably be a lot briefer on these movies. So, Curse of Michael Myers' main focus is on a cult. Apparently the shadowy man in the last film and Michael's tattoo was setting up the cult. This film's plot is extremely confusing and weird. It reveals that Michael has been infected by the Fawn, which is the cult, and this compels him to wipe out his entire bloodline on Halloween. This is a really dumb motivation. We didn't need an explanation to why Michael kills. The cult is led by Dr. Wynn, who was the doctor that briefly appeared in the original Halloween. Apparently he taught Michael to drive at the asylum, which was a small plot hole briefly addressed in the original. So yeah, that was him. Overall, this movie's plot just doesn't make much sense. This movie also has this annoying epilepsy moment, where it flashes lights all over this kill. And speaking of kills, they are all really forgettable. This is also the last movie with the original actor for Dr. Loomis. He unfortunately died before this movie could be completed, so he gets a lame off-screen death. Rest in peace, Loomis, my favourite Halloween character. The ending to this film is also really strange. Michael gets injected with a bunch of drugs. Don't really know what's in these. When Michael gets beaten up a bit, instead of bleeding, he starts leaking this drug. What? Why? How much did they give him? Bro, they must have replaced all his blood with that green goo. So freaking weird. What a way to end the original Halloween timeline, because the next film would partially reset the timeline. The next movie, Halloween H2O, aka Halloween 20 years later, in case you thought it was Halloween Water, continues the Halloween timeline from Halloween 2, so it erases Halloween 4, 5, and 6. And of course, Halloween 3 isn't canon to any of the other films. This means Laurie is back, and her daughter, Jamie, never existed. In fact, she doesn't just not exist, she is replaced by Laurie's son. This movie plays out mostly like a typical slasher, with Michael slowly killing teens at a boarding school. There's a moment in this film where Michael Myers' mask is CGI. It looks so freaking bad. It reminds me a lot of the miscolored mask in part 4. This movie does have a few cool moments, like the fight between Laurie and Michael. It's cool to see how much Laurie has changed. She's become a fighter. Nice to see her change from the girl who drops her weapon next to Michael to a fighter who gets plenty of hits on Michael. She beats Michael, but before she can make sure he's finished, she's stopped. The cops stop her and put Michael in a body bag and get ready to take him away. But before the cops can take Michael's corpse away, Laurie hijacks the van. She is determined to make sure Michael stays dead. And, as she predicted, Michael isn't dead. This ends in Laurie crashing the van. Michael ends up getting pinned under the van. Laurie takes this chance to finish Michael. Michael waves his hands in a very uncharacteristic show of fear, but Laurie doesn't hesitate to chop his head off. It's a step up from the terrible cult plotline that was happening in the original timeline. My biggest complaint about this film is Michael's mask. It looks terrible. I hate how clearly you can see his eyes. I feel it really takes away from the hollow shell of a man Michael is. Another thing I'd like to address is something I brought up in Jason Goes to Hell. We get a weird inconsistency. In this film, we can see Scream 2 playing on the TV. Now, this is weird because in Scream 1, they are watching Halloween 1. So does that mean that Halloween 1 is a film in H2O? No, of course not. It's just a small inconsistency, right? But if that would conclude the film, was having Michael's head chopped off enough to keep him down? I guess we'll find out in Halloween Resurrection. It opens with a flashback on how Michael survived. Apparently, before Laurie stole the ambulance with Michael's body bag in it, Michael got up and knocked out a paramedic, then switched clothes with the paramedic and put him in the body bag. He also crushed his throat so he couldn't speak. So when the body bag moves in H2O, it's not actually Michael, but a paramedic. So Laurie chopped off an innocent paramedic's head in H2O. So that means Michael is out there and ready to kill. After this flashback, we get a disappointing intro. Since the last film, Laurie's been put in an asylum. Michael doesn't hesitate breaking in. But Laurie evades him. Michael follows her to the roof, where she has somehow set up this trap using a crane. When the hell did she do this? Anyway, she hangs Michael over the edge of the roof, ready to drop him, but before she can, she has a moment of hesitation, remembering how she killed a paramedic. She goes to take Michael's mask off, but Michael grabs her and kills her, ending in a very unsatisfying death for such an iconic character. Now, the rest of the film takes place out at the Myers house. There is a reality show live stream happening there, run by the rapper Busta Rhymes. The rest of this film is pretty generic and repetitive. Now, while I've said that the Friday the 13th franchise can be repetitive, one thing it did was constantly give us different and creative kills. Halloween always seems to use the same bag of tricks. Michael is constantly doing the same kills. Lots of stabbing people and pinning them on walls, or stabbing them and lifting them up with the weapon, or straight crushing them with his bare hands. It's always the same stuff, which gets pretty boring. The only interesting part in this film is the streamer camera perspective. It's kind of cool seeing people killed through their cameras. Another thing worth mentioning is when Busta Rhymes electrocutes Michael in the balls. Yeah, that actually happened. This movie flopped. This resulted in another timeline fracture. So this timeline ended up having Halloween 1, 2, H2O, and Resurrection. Our next Halloween movie would completely reset the timeline, not being canon to any previous Halloween movies. The Halloween 2007 remake, or Rob Zombie's Halloween, is basically a recreation of the original Halloween. But before I get into the recreation bit, we have a lot of focus on child Michael. I don't personally like this, having so much of Michael's backstory being shared, since I think it takes away from his mystery. Michael is supposed to be mysterious, cold, and blank, but in this story he is driven out of anger. We see he was a victim of domestic abuse and bullying, and that's what drives him to kill. I'm also not personally a fan of Rob Zombie's style. It feels very crude and rough. This is shown in Michael's mask. I'm not really a fan of how dirty it is, but it's still better than most of the masks after Halloween 4. This Michael does do a good job at appearing intimidating. Michael is played by Tyler Mane, who is a wrestler. He's just perfect for the role, being very tall and well built. The rest of the movie plays out how you would expect. Pretty standard Michael stuff. He's still trying to kill Laurie, who is still his sister in this timeline. Overall, this movie isn't for me, but lots of fans liked it, so it got a sequel. Halloween 2009 opens with Michael's body being taken away in an ambulance. After he was taken down in the last film, but Michael is saved by a suicidal cow who crashes the ambulance. This opening scene is where we get a taste of how gory this film is. It's by far the most gruesome Halloween movie. This movie is brutal, it's so aggressive and raw in the way it goes about its kills. This movie has a weird segment where it copies the original Halloween by following Laurie to the hospital. Michael shows up and we get some cool recreations from the original Halloween too. But before we can get too far into these recreations, Laurie wakes up realizing it was a dream. What's actually happening is Michael's become a hobo who is eating his favourite snack from the original movie, dogs. He would then go into hiding for a year. Now the rest of the movie is pretty standard, minus this really weird subplot. Michael keeps seeing a ghostly version of his mother. Is this a hallucination or a ghost? Not sure. But what makes it even weirder is the fact that Laurie can see it too. It's super bizarre, and this leads the movie into a really bizarre ending. Michael has Laurie kidnapped in a shack, surrounded by police. Michael gets taken down. Then Laurie says she loves Michael. What? Why? You've only known him as a crazy serial killer who killed all your friends. In what world would you possibly love him? She then stabs and kills Michael, but what's weirder is she takes the mask and wears it. This lands her in an asylum where she can see the ghost mum as well. I'll be completely honest, I don't understand this at all. And I guess I never will, because this is the end of the Rob Zombie timeline. Again, this version of Michael is terrifying and brutal, which I can see as a big plus for the movie, but its weirdness really puts me off. There's just too many trippy ghost mum scenes. Rob Zombie also dips more into his normal movie styles, which I don't like. It's just far more crude than the last movie was. But with that, we conclude the Rob Zombie Halloween movies. We now move into the current Halloween timeline, Halloween 2018. Halloween 2018 restarts the timeline with only the original movie being canon. This means in this version of events, Laurie is not Michael's sister. Man, this movie is cool. It's honestly the best sequel since the original Halloween 2. This movie also has the second best Michael Myers mask. It looks so accurate to the original movie. It also has proper aged effects, unlike Rob Zombie's mask, which was way too over the top. This movie best captures the feel of the original film, and has John Carpenter return to work on the series. I think this movie does an excellent job at capturing the fear that the original Michael Myers has. He's mysterious and doesn't have motivation for doing what he's doing. This movie's also filled to the brim with references and callbacks to all the Halloween films. My personal favourite being these kids wearing the masks from Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. Another amazing aspect of this film is Laurie. She's become an extremely paranoid doomsday prepper who's turned her whole house into a fortress. There's so much to love about this film that I could go on for ages about it. But to save you some time, I'll cover this scene where Laurie traps Michael in the basement and starts a fire. It's so cool. I love how Michael doesn't move or flinch. It feels so perfect. It feels so unhuman. I love it. He feels like he really fills the role of his name, the shape. He's just the shape of a human. No humanity inside. I love it. That's what he should be. The movie ends with a shot of the basement burning with no Michael inside. This movie was a big success, resulting in 2 sequels being planned. The next film, Halloween Kills, opens where we left off. Laurie's house burning down. Firefighters arrive swiftly to put out the fire, but meet a gruesome end. Man, this opening scene of Michael fighting the firefighters is crazy. It's so cool. You can see why they used it in all the marketing for this film. It's awesome. Now, while Halloween 2018 focused on how the original film's events affected Laurie, this film focuses more on its effects on the town. The main focus of this film is the townspeople forming a mob to hunt Michael. My personal favourite parts of this film are the flashbacks. These flashbacks are created with so much attention to detail. The house is amazing. Everything from Michael's mask to the filming techniques are absolutely amazing. And impressive how close to the original it is. Their recreation of Dr. Loomis blew me away. This film's main problem is its story. It doesn't really go anywhere since another film is planned. This film just acts kind of like a bridge from the last film to the next film. It's a middle movie, so it's not particularly special. It doesn't push the plot very far forwards, and feels a little stagnant. But overall, I think it's a really cool film. But will the next film in the next Halloween trilogy conclude the story well? Oh no, it will not. Halloween Ends takes place 4 years after the events of Halloween Kills, and boy did they do Michael dirty. After being an absolute powerhouse and killing machine in the previous film, he is now reduced to a shell of what he was. He's weak and feeble, and he even cowers in this film. And he actually gets beaten up and has his mask stolen. What? This is just ridiculous. And you know why they did this? So they could do a bait and switch with the killers. That's right, in the end of this Halloween trilogy, Michael isn't even the killer. It's this kid Corey who is literally bullied by band students. Seriously? Seriously, those are the bullies you want to go with? Corey's literally the main killer for this film, and it's so stupid. Unlike Michael, he's just killing out of rage, which makes him less interesting. It's just so bizarre that for the final Halloween film of this trilogy, it would focus on random characters that we don't care about and have no connection to. The film also pushes the supernatural aspect of Michael. At first, Corey starts to sacrifice people to Michael, which makes him stronger. Michael also seems to transfer some evil into Corey with his eyes, but this doesn't make any sense. The movie is basically saying that Michael gets stronger from killing, right? Then shouldn't he be at his max strength, since in Halloween Kills, he killed more people than he ever really does? So, when did he get weak? It just makes no sense, it's just not explained. Michael only appears properly in the end of the film, and that's ridiculous. This film was extremely disappointing, mostly because the last two films had set it up so well. Then it feels like it just ditched the plot to do some completely random story. There's just so much wasted potential here. Overall, the Halloween franchise is a mess, even though it has my favourite slasher villain. Its sequel movies are just so bad and weird. It honestly pains me to put it as the third worst franchise in this list, but it's just so bad. The timeline is just so confusing and scuffed, but I'll try to summarize it for you guys. We have Halloween 1 and 2 together. I'm going to count this as a timeline since Michael was supposed to die here. Then we have Season of the Witch, which is all by itself. Then we have Halloweens 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6. Then we have the H2O timeline, which contains 1, 2, H2O, and Resurrection. Then we have Rob Zombie's films that are completely separate. This includes the Rob Zombie film and Halloween 2, 2009. And finally we have the current timeline, which contains the original Halloween, Halloween 2018, Halloween Kills, and Halloween Ends. The fact that we even need to map out these films just to figure out how we are supposed to watch them tells you a lot about the decline of the series, and to make this even more confusing, 3 of the films are called Halloween, just Halloween. That's so confusing, giving 3 films the exact same name. Most of the movies just can't capture the fear the shape held in the original film. But moving on from Halloween. Number 2.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise currently has 9 movies. The original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of the best and most influential horror films of all time. It's really a unique film, but unfortunately nearly all the sequels would be nowhere near as amazing as the original film. None of them even really compete. None of them ever captures the magic of the first film. Now, if you thought Halloween's timeline was bad, well, get ready for a wild ride with Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because this franchise really goes off the rails. But before we get into that mess, let's start with the original. Now, the name of the film may make you think it's a horrific, gory film, but it's actually not. Most of the kills aren't that gory, and are filmed in ways that make it seem a lot worse than it actually is. People will see the imagery from the film, and will often imagine it worse than it is. Like the meat hook scene doesn't really show much blood at all. This film's actually focused on psychological horror. Its amazing opening scene really gets you feeling uncomfortable when our teen protagonists pick up a very unstable hitchhiker who cuts himself and one of the survivors. Unlike all the other films we've covered, there's not one main killer, but a family of killers. Leatherface is definitely the face of the franchise, but he's surprisingly sympathetic in the first film, while his brothers are the real monsters. They are far worse than him. They have no souls, and they are extremely sadistic, only driven by sick desires to see others suffer. Our final girl Sally really goes through a lot. The family spends so much time torturing her for fun in the dinner scene. This is where the true horror is in this film, being trapped in such a horrific situation with no escape. The film is also surprisingly cinematic, with lots of super iconic shots and moments. The 2 most iconic moments are probably Leatherface slamming the metal door, and the final scene where Sally escapes and Leatherface spins around. I honestly don't have anything negative to say about this film. It's just a great horror movie that every horror fan should watch. Too bad I can't say the same about the sequels. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 actually follows the original's continuity well, unlike most of the later films. But this film would have a big shift in tone, becoming more of a dark comedy. I mean seriously, there's a chainsaw sword fight at one point. I appreciate the movie's continuity. It brings back all the original Sawyers from the first film, even the hitchhiker who died being used as a puppet by Leatherface in this awesome opening scene. This film is where the family gets their name Sawyers as well. We also get an additional Sawyer brother, Chop Top. Chop Top is one of the highlights of this film. He's like the hitchhiker from the original, but like 2 times as crazy. He even has a metal plate in his head from Vietnam. He's quite an entertaining and unstable character. The main characters for this film is a radio host, who overheard the attack at the beginning of the film, and Lieutenant Lefty, a relative of Franklin from the first film. Lefty is hunting down the Sawyers, seeking revenge for killing Franklin in the first film. The main characters track down the Sawyers to this actually insane location, the Texas Battle Land. This location definitely lives up to its name. The whole final act takes place here, and it's honestly insane. The set design is amazing. We get great chase shots in this crazy tunnel. There's another family dinner scene, and of course, my favourite bit, the chainsaw sword fight. In the lead up to the fight, Lefty just seems to lose it. He runs around like an insane person, chopping down the supports for the tunnels. When he finally finds the Sawyers, he yells, "I'm the Lord of the Harvest."
I'm the Lord of the Harvest.
Who's that? Some new health food bunch?
He even seems to confuse the Sawyers, which really says a lot if he's able to out-crazy the cannibal family. The chainsaw fight ensues. During the fight, Drayton Sawyer gets cut in the butt. As he starts bleeding to death, he decides to detonate a grenade. This results in all the Sawyers and Lefty blowing up, minus Chop Top and our radio host. Our final 2 survivors have one final fight on top of this crazy mountain. Honestly, there's not too much negative about this film. Even though it doesn't capture the fear or tone of the original film, it's not trying to. It wants to do something different. It takes a new direction and some risks, and makes a weirdly funny film. There are some weird choices though, like making Leatherface have a crush on our main character, which gives us an extremely weird scene where Leatherface does some sus things with the chainsaw and dances, sort of. Honestly, I don't know what to say about this scene. It's a weird moment that's very memorable and iconic. So overall, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 is a different but good sequel. It's the only sequel I like and personally accept as a continuation of the original. But let's move on to the third film, Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. This movie is boring. I had to rewatch this film because on my first viewing, I fell asleep because it's just so nothing. This movie really doesn't do anything unique. There's no scenes that stand out. It's a very inconsistent film. Somehow Leatherface survived the end of the last film, and his family has been replaced with a whole new cast. This new cast is nowhere near as intimidating as the other Sawyers. And most of the survivors in this film are bland and boring, and don't really have much personality. There is one exception to this though, Benny. Benny is a survivalist, and he uses his skills effectively. It's nice seeing at least one competent survivor. Aside from this though, the film is mostly just random attacks, and copies of things that we've already seen, like another dinner scene. This film just doesn't have too much of an identity. Besides just being a boring and generic movie, it does still do something I hate. They turn Leatherface into a rapist. He has a daughter, and it's implied that Leatherface did sus things to make this happen. Come on man, there's already cannibalism. I don't need this sort of stuff in the films. But honestly, I don't have much more to say on this film. I could go over the plot, but who really cares? It's just so nothing. So instead, let's just jump right into Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation, easily the worst film. And that's quite an accomplishment considering later films in the franchise. This movie is just dreadful. Its main cast of survivors are either just nothing characters or annoying. This movie also gives us a new set of Sawyers to make up the family, except they're not Sawyers. Their family name has been retconned to be the Slaughters. The Sawyers are now the Slaughters. This film loves to copy the original. So many shots and moments are just straight up copies pulled from the original. We have the classic scenes of our final girl running through the woods, Leatherface cutting down the front door as the final girl runs upstairs, and of course our final girl diving out a window, and something that every Texas movie has had so far, a dinner scene. Now, as unoriginal as a lot of this movie is, there is one extreme unique feature to this film, and that would be the Illuminati's involvement. That's right, the Illuminati is in this film, and you might be thinking, wow, this will make the movie funny at least. Well, you'd be wrong if you thought that. It literally makes zero sense. It's very briefly mentioned earlier in the film. It's mentioned that potentially an agency is watching them, but it just sounds like crazy talk. But no, it's not crazy talk. During the mandatory dinner scene, a mysterious man shows up, says he wants them to know the true meaning of horror, then he shows off his weird belly, which has some crazy shit on it, then proceeds to lick our main character and leaves. What? What the hell is this? What the f*** was the point of that? Are you implying that all the Texas Chainsaw movies have been controlled by the Illuminati? I have no freaking clue! I don't get it. It's actually so freaking dumb, and serves no purpose. This whole movie is filled with dumb things like that. Like our main villain has a robot leg. I don't know why he has it, but it's just a weird choice. They also decided to bring the grandpa back even though we saw him die in the second film. Then we saw his corpse in the third film. But maybe this is just someone else, since he looks completely different. But who cares, since he randomly shows up and then literally just walks off in the next scene again. So why even bother thinking about these things? Well, if the Illuminati's appearance wasn't crazy enough, this movie's craziness is boosted by our main villain, Vilma Slaughter. He's constantly screaming and making weird sounds, and his constant over-the-top energy is really bizarre and honestly kind of annoying. Now I want to talk about the bizarre ending this movie has. It's honestly really weird. Our final girl escapes the Slaughter family. Vilna and Leatherface chase her. As the chase persists, out of nowhere, the most random thing happens. A small plane flies in out of nowhere and hits Vilma, killing him. Well, hit is a strong word to me. It looks like the wheel tapped him and he died. But regardless, a completely random plane just killed the main villain. That's literally the dumbest ending I can think of. What lazy writing. Now you might be thinking that the Illuminati sent this plane to kill him, but as far as I can tell, they didn't. There's no explanation or connection to the Illuminati. It just seems someone's bad at flying a plane and by chance killed Vilma. After this, a car picks up our final girl and surprise, it's the Illuminati, here to reveal the big plot twist.
It was supposed to be a spiritual experience. I can't tell you how disappointed I am. I suppose it's something we all live with. People like us who strive for something, a sense of harmony. Perhaps it's disappointment that keeps us going. La raison d'être. Unfortunately, it's never been easy for me. One of my many failings.
You.
That's right, it was supposed to be a spiritual journey. Wow. What? That literally explains nothing and makes no sense. Are all of the past movies just spiritual journeys? Honestly, just this movie. I'm so done with it. This movie did so bad that when it came out, it got shelved for a year, then was re-released with a new name, going from The Return of Texas Chainsaw Massacre to Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation. But thank God this film is the final movie in the original timeline. I'm so glad we don't have to keep following the Illuminati plot. So, the next film is the 2003 remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And in a surprising twist, this movie is really good, but extremely dark. As any good remakes do, this takes the original idea and puts a unique twist on it. My favourite example of this is The Hitchhiker. In the original film, the hitchhiker was a crazy dude who cut himself and Franklin, but in this film the hitchhiker is a confused looking girl. The situation escalates drastically when she pulls out a gun. She's constantly muttering they're all dead, and in a shocking twist, uses the gun on herself. I found this extremely shocking and intense. A lot of this film is very brutal and intense, and honestly, a bit mean-spirited. I think this works making it a good horror film, but it's not a movie I would casually watch. Ironically, its best aspects are also its weakest, in my opinion. I just found the treatment of the characters a bit much, but maybe that's just me. These are horror films after all. Now let's talk about the highlight of the film, Sheriff Hoyt. He was easily the scariest aspect of this film, with his brutality and his control over the situation. As a sheriff, he abuses his power to put our survivors in some tense situations. The movie's intensity is amped up by its cinematography and setting design. Our two main locations are excellent. We have the family's house, which feels very tense in the way it's filmed, and a meat factory, which is a dangerous and intense place. The overall filming in this movie is great. This scene here looks terrifying, and this is the first time we see Leatherface use the face of an actual character from the movie. It's extremely disturbing. A random fact about this film is the Sawyers are renamed again to be known as the Hoyts. Overall, this is a really good horror film, but it's just too sadistic and brutal for my liking. But this movie did do well enough to get a prequel, that movie being the Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Beginning 2006. Unfortunately, this movie doesn't follow its predecessor in terms of originality. This is much more of a generic Texas Chainsaw movie. We get a lot of the classic tropes like the dinner scene and the final girl jumping out of the window. A big focus on this movie is filling the backstory for the 2003 reboot. Since it is a prequel, we know certain things need to happen, so it takes away some of the tension that the 2003 Texas Chainsaw had. Overall, this is a pretty generic and forgettable movie. This movie is very gory and brutal, just like its predecessor, but this timeline would only end up including Texas Chainsaw 2003 and Texas Chainsaw Beginning. After this, we would move on to Texas Chainsaw 3D. Texas Chainsaw 3D would be canon only to the original Texas Chainsaw movie, but none of its sequels, so don't worry, no Illuminati involvement. But even without the Illuminati involvement, this movie would manage to be one of the worst films in the whole franchise. Surprisingly, it actually has a good start, but this is probably the only good thing that I'm going to say about this movie. The beginning of the film takes place immediately after the original. It does a great job at recreating the house from the original, and there's lots of returning actors who play different roles in the Sawyer house in the beginning, which is really cool. But other than this, the movie is a mess. We get a time jump 40 years later, but our main character, who was a baby in the beginning, is now in her 20s, so she should be at least 40. But moving away from this stupid era, let's move on to the stupid characters. This movie by far has the stupidest characters. They are constantly doing stupid things, like when this guy tries to ram this gate, or when the main characters leave a total stranger in this huge house, and he inevitably starts robbing them, or when they're repetitively told they need to read this important note, and don't. It's pretty annoying just how dumb they constantly are. But another annoying aspect of this film is its plot. The plot tries to present Sawyers and Bubba in a sympathetic light. Now this isn't necessarily a bad idea, but they made it canon to the original, and they were frickin' monsters in that movie, killing, eating, and tormenting people with not a single sight of sympathy. It's just absurd to me that they would try this. There's also sort of a family feud with the Sawyers, and another family called the Hartmans. The Hartmans are presented as the villains of the story, and yes, they're bad people, but they aren't frickin' cannibals. Honestly, it's just a mess. This being a 3D movie means we are obviously in for some in-your-face moments. Like this part where Leatherface throws a chainsaw at the camera. It looks so freaking bad. But not as bad as this death scene where a man slides into a meat grinder. It looks like garbage. Why does it look so bad? Also, a small irritation I have with this scene is the sheriff sees this happen and it's just like, well, I didn't see nothing. And just lets Leatherface get away with this just because he didn't like the guy who went in the meat grinder. Bro, he's the sheriff. He can't just ignore that. But anyway, a big part of this film is our main character Heather is actually Leatherface's cousin. And this results in one of the worst lines I've ever heard in a Texas Chainsaw movie.
Do your thing, cuz.
This character, who was originally a pretty normal girl, very easily transitions into a killer extremely quickly. It's just a terrible film overall. This new timeline is also continued in Leatherface 2017. Well, actually, it's a prequel to the original, so this timeline goes Leatherface 2017, the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, then Texas Chainsaw 3D. Leatherface 2017 is by far the most unique film in the franchise. It doesn't follow the original formula at all. It's an origin story for Leatherface. Long story short, after a murder that would start a rivalry that would continue into Texas 3D, young Leatherface is taken to a reformatory, where he would stay for 10 years. Now this leads us to a really dumb plot point. The rest of the movie follows some kids who escaped and are on the run. There is one kid named Bud who is the perfect fit for Leatherface. He looks and acts like Leatherface, but it's the good old bait and switch plot twist. This kid isn't Leatherface because he gets killed. The real Leatherface is actually this fairly charismatic kid named Jackson. Now I get this was done to spice things up in the movie, but Bud makes a far more believable Leatherface. This twist is just kinda lame. Now, while I appreciate the deviation from the normal Texas Chainsaw formula, this movie doesn't feel like one of them at all. A lot of this movie is spent following the kids traveling around. It's just not that fun, really. The movie feels like it doesn't have many standout scenes and iconic shots. And honestly, even though it's unique, it's very forgettable in my opinion. But with Leatherface out of the way, that leaves us with one final film in the franchise, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2022. How freaking stupid are these names? We basically have 3 movies in this franchise called Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We have the original, the 2003 remake, and this 2022 film. But back to the 2022 film, this movie is honestly a mixed bag. It has some really nice imagery, making for some very iconic shots. It also has some really impressive and creative kills. This movie is not afraid to go all out with its kills, but it's not all good. This movie has some major problems. I feel like this movie could be really good if it committed to its over-the-top gore and a bit more comedy. I feel like this movie's trying to be serious and campy at the same time. It really clashes in my opinion. The most well-known scene is easily this clip.
Try anything and you're canceled, bro.
It feels very out of place in a Texas movie, and lots of people were instantly turned off by this. And honestly, I don't know how I feel about it. It's got to be satire, right? Either way, it's kinda funny. I mean, how stupid are these guys? They think they can stop a chainsaw killer by cancelling him. Bro, this guy has no stakes in society, or any social media, or any social presence in general. He does not give a shit if you cancel him. Either way, people didn't like the humor. Now, let's talk about my least favorite part of this film, Sally's return. Sally being the survivor from the original. This movie tries to copy the Halloween reboot by having Sally be like Laurie, becoming a paranoid survivalist. Now this could be cool, But it's not, trust me. She's completely underutilized in this film. She doesn't really show up till the final act. Then, instead of helping, she actively makes the situation worse by locking our main survivors in a car and using them for bait. She then confronts Leatherface, but he doesn't remember her, causing her to basically have a sook. She then finally decides to attack, resulting in this.
Put your seatbelt on.
So she dies immediately. Pathetic. It's honestly actively annoying because she put our main characters in danger. What an absolute waste of a character. Oh wait, she's not dead yet. She somehow survived this long enough to tell this girl who was a school shooting survivor to use a gun. Then she dies in the trash. Fitting, since her character was trash in this film. But as I mentioned, our main character is a school shooting survivor, which really dampens the mood. Now I don't want to touch on politics at all here, or seem unsympathetic, but scenes like the bus massacre are just depressing because they are sort of being compared to school shooting. Feels a bit heavy for a Texas Chainsaw film. Overall, I didn't personally like this film, but it's definitely not the worst film in the franchise. It's probably a mid-tier movie, but I just didn't like it. Maybe I have Texas Chainsaw fatigue at this point. Overall, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise is a messy, lazy franchise. It's had like 4 timelines, the family has had like 3 names, and they're constantly redoing stuff. So I think it easily earned the second lowest ranked position on this list. But now, the moment you might have been waiting for. What is the absolute worst horror franchise? Which franchise gets the worst the fastest? Number 1. Hellraiser. Hellraiser currently has 11 films. And boy are they a flaming hot mess. This franchise has no direction, no quality control, many behind the scenes issues, and has no shame in reusing plots or straight up getting scripts from other films and using them for their movies. But before the movies devolved to that mess, we have the first Hellraiser. The first Hellraiser is a really unique horror film. It's got really impressive effects, mostly, and isn't afraid to get dark. It's gory and unsettling, and it never eases up on this. Now most people when they think of Hellraiser will probably think of Pinhead and the Cenobites, but in the original film, they aren't the main antagonists. They're more of a neutral party, they don't even show up till halfway through the film. The main antagonist is Frank. Frank died after messing with the box, a connection between our world and hell. After being trapped in hell, he's found a way to escape, and it involves blood. Frank is a great manipulator and manipulates his brother's wife Julie to lure men to their house, to kill them and use their blood to bring Frank back. This pair of villains is an unsettling duo. The constant lies and manipulation from these two is scary. It makes an interesting plot. And on top of them we have the Cenobites. Now, as I said earlier, they aren't the main villains of this film, but they do add an extra layer of dread. Overall, the first Hellraiser is a really unique film, with only minor issues, like seeing the cart in this effect and this end scene. This dragon shows up at the end of the film and takes the box. This thing is never explained in the later films, or seen again, and to make things even weirder, it was disguised as a homeless man who was eating crickets in a pet shop. An odd ending for sure. Hellraiser 2 Hellbound is still a fairly good film, with most of the cast and characters from the original film returning. It feels like a well-connected sequel. The effects are better in this film as well. The story of this film isn't quite as good as the original. It has a stronger focus on the lore of the Cenobites. Our new villain, Dr. Chinar, isn't as creepy as Frank. Our second villain for the film is Julia from the original. She's a much darker villain in this film than she was in the original. Unfortunately, she kinda gets brushed aside halfway through the film, which is unfortunate. Now you may be thinking, come on, bear with me. This is your number 1 worst horror franchise. Why are you only saying good things about it? Well, good point, viewer. So let's get straight into Hellraiser 3, Hell on Earth. I won't waste too much time on Hellraiser 2, because it's mostly pretty solid. But Hellraiser 3 would change the tone of the rest of the films. Shifting the villain role onto Pinhead, in the previous films he'd been somewhat of a neutral character, but in Hellraiser 3 he becomes a standard slasher villain. The overall tone is extremely different. We get plenty of one-liners.
I am the way.
There was also a location change. This change from filming in England to filming in America really changes the tone. All these changes make it feel very separate to the first two. Even though this movie is alright, it marks the beginning of the decline for the Hellraiser films. This is where they lose sight of what made the original 2 films so special. Despite this disconnect with the original films, The movie somewhat follows the continuity from the originals. The film is a mixed bag when it comes to effects. Some are really awesome, and some are downright terrible. And man, the new Cenobites made by Pinhead are bad. They look so shit compared to the original gang. But overall, the action is fun. They don't hold back when it comes to the massacre. So if you love classic slashers with action, this will easily satisfy you. It is really cool. But for me, this isn't what Hellraiser is about. It's perfectly shown in how different Pinhead's personality is. He went from a very neutral and impassive side villain to the one-liner main antagonist who goes around causing chaos. Not being a generic slasher really made Hellraiser stand out, but this takes away from that. But this movie has nothing on how bad Hellraiser Bloodline is, aka the space one. Yep, that's right. To put this into perspective, it took Friday the 13th 10 movies to get to space, while it only took Hellraiser 4 movies. But it's not just about space. The movie is divided into 3 timelines to follow. We have the space timeline, the present timeline, and the 18th century timeline. The movie is a mess. It's trying to do too much for its own good. While watching this film, the acting really stood out as bad to me. The lines just felt so awkward in their delivery. Despite the total mess this movie is, it somehow manages to keep fairly consistent with the plot of the last film. This film again is a mixed bag when it comes to effects. It has some horrendously bad CGI, but some really neat practical effects. The space station that the final act of the film takes place at is actually sort of a transformer that turns into the box. The space station is a trap to destroy Pinhead and the Cenobites, and as far as I can tell, Pinhead actually dies here. This part actually made me laugh so hard. It's so goofy that the space station is the box, and I can't believe this is how Pinhead dies. Now while this isn't the last movie, not by a long shot, it is the furthest in the timeline, so yeah, Pinhead dies in space. This movie would mark the end of an era for Hellraiser. All the other Hellraiser movies would be direct to DVD. Even though Bloodline was pretty bad, it would pale in comparison to how bad the next films would be. Now, with the next 3 films, I'll sort of bunch them together, since they all have extremely similar plots. Hellraiser Inferno, Hellseeker, and Deader are unbelievably bad. All the movies do that annoying thing where the main character realizes it isn't real and wakes up. Now that may sound annoying by itself, but it happens constantly throughout the films. Weird hell stuff starts to happen, then suddenly they wake up. Then this will just happen again and again. Hellseeker was particularly bad with this. It happened an absurd number of times. I probably should have counted how many times it happened, but I couldn't bring myself to rewatch it to find out. But anyway, the plot isn't entertaining, because if everything turns out to be fake, then why care? This also makes everything that happens in a scene less interesting and important because it's not real, and probably won't push the plot forward. It's actually insane that this happened once, let alone 3/4 times, but I'll get into the 4th one later. All 3 movies basically copy that structure. Now that may sound completely horrible, and it is, but these movies do something else incredibly bad and lazy. The scripts for these movies weren't originally written to be Hellraiser scripts. They were scripts for other films that were repurposed to be Hellraiser movies, meaning they shoved Pinhead and the box into these films, and it really shows. The Hellraiser parts don't fit in at all with the main plots of the films. It's painfully obvious. A perfect example of this is Hellraiser Inferno's villain. Throughout Inferno we follow Joseph, a cop. He's tracking a killer called the Engineer, and it's a big mystery. At the end it's revealed that his therapist is the villain, manipulating things, but after we get the reveal that it's the therapist, we get a long monologue, then another reveal that the therapist is Pinhead. You can clearly see that the plot originally intended for the Engineer to be the therapist, but they just shoved Hellraiser in. That's honestly how all 3 of these films feel. The Cenobites barely appear in the movies at all, and when they do, it feels like it's just to fit the Hellraiser quota. And like any bad movie, the effects are mostly trash. As I brought up before, Hellraiser Inferno follows Joseph, and man is he horrible to watch. He is such a bad person. Every chance he gets to do something bad, he does. He cheats on his wife, frames his partner for a murder. He's just horrible. And yes, that's the point of his character. That's why he's revealed to be in hell, but it still doesn't make following him any fun. Then in Hellraiser Seeker, they bring back Christy from the first 2 films, but they completely waste her character. She's only briefly in the beginning and the end, and worse, they make her a murderer. Now 2 of the kills you could maybe justify, but 3 are just crazy. I really don't like how they treated Kirsty in this film. It would honestly be better if they just left her out. Hellraiser Deader is a bit different from the previous 2. Our main character isn't in hell, but there's still tons of fake outs in it. And the imagery in this film is really weird. I didn't like anything to do with the train parts. Sorry, I won't even be able to show anything relating to it either, because it's very inappropriate. Now this is very nitpicky, But what kind of name is Deader? It sounds so stupid. Being dead is not a Spectrum thing. You can't be any more or less dead. Now let's move on to Hellraiser Hellworld. Hellworld is a little bit of a step up, but not by much at all. There are some cool actors in this film. We have Lance Henriksen from Aliens. He's the android in Aliens. And Henry Cavill, who's Superman and Geralt in The Witcher. It was really cool seeing these actors. This movie didn't take itself too seriously, which made it more tolerable to watch than the last 3 films. But this movie also suffered from the same mistakes. Yet again, it doesn't feel like a Hellraiser film. It just feels like Hellraiser was shoved in as an afterthought. In fact, the real Pinhead doesn't show up in the main plot, but in a throwaway scene at the end. But yeah, that's right, nothing is real in this movie, just like the last 3 films. But this time, it's not a dream or hell, but drugs. The villain drugs our main characters, so basically everything isn't real. When did they decide that this is what Hellraiser is about? Why do we need 4 films when nothing is what it is? It's so frustrating. While watching all these horror movies for this video, these 4 Hellraisers were the closest to breaking me. It took so much effort just to tolerate them. We now reach the 9th Hellraiser film, Hellraiser Revolutions. This is by far the lowest quality film, in terms of filming, but believe it or not, after 4 films of the same plot, we finally get a different story. But that can't make up for the absolutely insane fact that Hellraiser Revolutions was filmed in only 3 weeks. That's right, only 3 weeks! The studio was going to lose the rights to the franchise if they didn't get a movie out fast. And by God, did they get one out very fast. And boy does it show. This film is broken up into 2 stories. One is found footage, literally the cheapest and quickest thing they could have done, and the other takes place in a house. It feels a lot like a soap opera. Honestly, it looked like that show Home and Away. Just the way they filmed it, paired with the acting and family drama, all taking place in one bland house, gave it that feel. It truly is the worst film when it comes to the quality of production. But we can't talk about this film without addressing the elephant in the room. And that's the fact that this is the first film to not have Doug Bradley playing Pinhead. The script and situation was so terrible that Doug Bradley decided to decline the script. And without Doug, Pinhead is just nothing. He understands and performs the character so perfectly. Even with all the terrible movies, he is always a major highlight, and without him, Hellraiser suffers greatly. I could go over all the plot points, but why bother? I think this tells you everything you need to know about the quality of this film. Most people consider this to be the worst film, and it's hard to argue that, but this wasn't my least favourite. That honour probably goes to Deader or Hellseeker. It was just so tiring seeing the same thing repeated, so I was probably just sick of Hellraiser at that point. Probably not the best mindset to be in when trying to write an unbiased review, but hey, that's how I felt. But for that we only have 2 more Hellraiser films to bear with. The next being Hellraiser Judgment, the 10th film. Like the last one, this one was made so the studio could keep the rights to the franchise, but despite the circumstances, this film is better than the last 3 films. At least it's very stylized, and has enough unique aspects to stand out from the rest. It's a very odd film to say the least. People are taken to be judged, and it involves a very weird process. We have this guy eating paper, then spewing it into a tube, which naked ladies would then roll around in. So freaking gross and weird. I really didn't like it. Outside of this, there is a plot about detectives tracking down a killer. But plot twist, the killer is one of the detectives. Basically, he's killing to get revenge on his other cop brother who's sleeping with his wife or something. But the weird part about this is he's trying to make a trade of Pinhead, trading his cheating brother's soul for his. But boom! Plot twist, an angel doesn't want Pinhead to kill this crazy killer, because heaven needs him because he causes fear in sinners. That's just so stupid. Like, that's just really dumb. But whatever. Pinhead also thinks this is stupid, so he kills the angel. But God doesn't like that, so he banishes Pinhead to Earth, turning him into a human. It's a really weird film, and a really weird situation. But also, back in Hellraiser 4, we see Pinhead die in the future on the space station, so at some point after this, he needs to turn back into a Cenobite. But we obviously don't see that, or find out why, because we only have 1 film left. Hellraiser 2022. This film is actually not bad, well, at least compared to the last films. I would solidly place this in the middle of the Hellraiser films in terms of quality. This film seems to have more of an understanding of what Hellraiser films are, having more of the lore included, like the Leviathan from Hellraiser 2. I also like some ideas presented, like the box having multiple configurations before it becomes the Leviathan configuration we saw in Hellraiser 2, and I like that each of the configurations has meaning, and the villain is sort of interesting. But this film does have flaws, like nearly all of the characters being uninteresting and unlikable. And something I didn't like was the designs of the Cenobites. They look too alien, and honestly a bit messy. To explain what I mean, take a look at the original designs. The outfit and their skins are very distinct, being black and white, making their clothes and body very distinct. Then there are their wounds. The black and white really allows the red wounds to be focused on. It made them somewhat neat in a weird way. While on these Cenobites, there is so much going on in these designs. They're a bit complex and their colours are less defined. This makes the impact of the wounds less effective because it's not as focused. But that's just what I think. But with that we conclude the last Hellraiser. The franchise has such a decline in quality, with some of the worst excuses for films, based on weird behind-the-scenes dramas, like buying scripts and rushing out films for licensing. Even before that, I feel there wasn't a need for sequels. The original tells a horrifying story that's extremely unique and dark. The second one continued the story well enough, and is a good film, but after, I just don't think any of the other films are necessary. None of them really capture what the first one did. That's why I think Hellraiser is easily the franchise that declines in quality the fastest. And with that, we have all 9 horror movie franchises ranked. I had to watch a total of 80 movies exactly to make this video, so I hope you enjoyed. Did you agree with my rankings? Let me know what order you think they belong in. And if you do think there's any other horror movie franchises that belong on this list, let me know. If this video does really well, then there are other horror franchises I could cover, like Amityville Horror, but there are 17 movies in that, so you guys are really gonna have to like it. Also, quick shout out to Dead Meat. His channel is by far the best horror related movie channel. His videos really helped with refreshing my memory on specific moments in the movies. And a shout out to Fez9, my best friend, for watching all those movies with me. His channel will be in the link in the description below. I will be releasing a supercut of this video soon, which is all 3 parts together, and maybe at some point in the future, Fez and I might do some videos talking about the franchises in a casual, unscripted way. Anyway, thanks for bearing with me for this massive video.